What's up, guys? My name is Dustin Lang. I'm the online pastor here at New Story Church. I want to welcome you to our YouTube channel. Here we'll be posting content that inspires you, that challenges you, and most importantly, leads you closer to Jesus. Hope you enjoy.
Thank members of the church for their efforts today, helping to clean up our community.
I can't lie, I'm actually nervous. I'm very nervous.
Yes, yes. Can we give it up for all the volunteers once more? A big yes. Woo! I gotta tell you, I have been so blessed just the past couple of weeks, just seeing and witnessing how so many of you have been serving in many, many different ways. It's just been amazing to see all the social media posts, the videos, and just even this highlight reel. Just to see all of you guys really be the hands and feet of Jesus has been such an encouragement to me, and I know to all of our staff and to our church as well. I don't know about you, but I was walking over from the parking structure to our church, and I gotta tell you, the streets look mighty, mighty clean, all right? So thank you for all of those who also did the beautification project as well yesterday. I'm so blessed by so many of you. The only thing I'm not blessed by is gotta be Pastor Tom rappelling from that building, all right? Like, how many of you have seen, were you guys there? Did you guys see live, Instagram live the video? I mean, he was going 1 mile per hour, okay? But no. We know how scary it is. I'm afraid of heights as well. Thank you, Pastor Tom, for sacrificing yourself and doing that to raise funds for the Union Rescue Mission. Yes. Well, if you're first time here, welcome. We're so glad that you could join us. My name's David. I'm one of the pastors here at New Story, and we're so glad that you could join us today. We are currently in a series called We Love LA. But again, it's more than just a sermon series, right? It's really a call to mobilize our church to love the city, to love the people in our city. So big thank you to all of you once more. You know, in the past couple of weeks, we've witnessed so many different things. And I think the common theme that we've been saying over and over again in this pulpit is really this, that we believe that every single person is created in the image of God. That people are image bearers of God, and that makes every person special. You know, in the city of Los Angeles alone, there are an estimated 4 million people. The second most populous state in all of America. And for some reason, God has placed our little church in the heart of LA to make a measurable difference. And so every week we've been tackling a different topic, feeding the hungry, healing the sick, loving our neighbors. And today I will be covering a topic, what I believe is one of the biggest crises facing LA, and that's people experiencing homelessness. So to really begin, I want to show you this video.
the closer the person is to us and the less common the struggle, the easier it is to love. God forbid I found out my wife has 3 months to live. I quit my job, I quit everything, right? What if it's just an acquaintance of yours? And what if the problem's recurring? The more common and further from us, how common is homelessness? And how frequently is the homeless person someone dear to us personally? Never. So I took a few moments a couple of weeks ago and camped outside of a couple of our campuses, and I wanted to see how we were doing, you know, when it's hardest to love. So how did our church do in the video? I'm going to tell you now. Awesome. I was crying inside that beard.
You thought you'd bring us something to eat this morning?
Here's a coffee.
A little coffee, keep you warm. Let's just pray for you real quick. Dear Heavenly Father, so thankful, Lord, that you brought this man to your church on your day, Lord. We are so blessed that he is here. Lord, we just pray and pour into this man and just bless him and love him. Bless you.
Well, God, I just pray that you would just meet this man, and Father, that if it would be your will, that you would just have him come into our church, but that you would just know the love of Christ. I don't want you to be out here without knowing him, okay?
You're welcome to come inside. We'd love to have you.
You can come in if you want.
That's all right.
I wanted to start there, and I wanted to show that video because I wonder just how our church would do. Like, we were going to dress Pastor Tom up and kind of replicate that scene, but we thought, hey, you know what? It's probably better that we don't do that, right? But again, like, how would we treat the least of us? Because I don't know about you, because I would love for our church to be that kind of church when it comes to people experiencing homelessness. You know, coming to church, I'm sure you've noticed so many people in the tents right here, right around our streets. They're all around us. In fact, let me give you some stats. In the last 6 years, people experiencing homelessness has spiked up 75%. 59,000 people are homeless in the county of Los Angeles. Over 36,000 people are homeless in the city of Los Angeles alone. Okay? This is up 16% from last year. A little over 27,000 of them are actually unsheltered. Youth experiencing homelessness is up 24% from last year. According to an LA Times article, on average, nearly 3 homeless people are dying daily in the county, nearly double the rate of deaths by homicide, illness, addiction, accident, suicide, and the ravages of being unsheltered among the primary causes of death. People experiencing homelessness, it's a crisis, and we haven't found a solution to this epidemic. Now, I think in large, including myself, we often ignore the homeless. Like, we see them, but we don't see them. You know what I'm talking about? Now, there might be a variety of reasons for it, but I want to have some real talk with us today, right now. You know, for some of us, maybe, you know, when we think of people experiencing homelessness, they've become more of an inconvenience and a nuisance for us. And I think part of the reason why is because of our false or misguided notion and belief that all homeless people are drug addicts or mentally ill. And we tend to generalize a group of people because of past negative experiences or encounters. And maybe you've had those negative encounters with one. See, according to one source, about 20 to 30%, somewhere in between, of people experiencing homelessness have some mental illness. And maybe those are the people that you've encountered. And maybe it was scary for some of you. And for others of us, maybe we might feel guilty, so we try not to think about it. Because right here in the streets we walk, we continually encounter people who are homeless and hungry or thirsty or sick. Now, some of us, we might feel very angry for a variety of reasons. Angry that we don't do better as a society to curb or solve homelessness. Or maybe we're angry at the homeless person, thinking, look, you need to pull yourselves up by your bootstraps. You need to do something and get a job. Or maybe we're angry at ourselves for feeling guilty for not doing anything. And so we feel numb or indifferent and jaded, depressed. Or maybe others of us think like, look, I just don't know what to do. Like, I don't know. I'm scared. I'm fearful. I don't know. A genuine sense of, I don't know. And maybe even for others of you, maybe you just feel uncomfortable. Or maybe I know someone else is going to take care of it, so I don't have to do it. And I want to just say, in all honesty, I've probably felt all of that in different seasons of my life. See, the goal today is not to make you feel guilty. Okay? It's not a plea for you to open up your wallets and give. My one goal today is to relay the heart of Jesus to you so that our hearts, your heart and mine, that our capacity to love would just grow just a little bit more. That our capacity to see people experiencing homelessness, that our eyes would open up just a little bit more. I would love for us to grow in compassion towards the vulnerable, the poor, the sick, the powerless, the invisible. So with that, let's see what the Bible has to say. Let's see what Jesus has to say about people experiencing homelessness. You know, all throughout the Gospels, you see tons of characters. You see all of these different characters, right? People who are rejected, ostracized, ignored, cursed, and marginalized. I mean, there was the leper, the blind, the mute, the paralytic, the widow, the poor. These were people who had no future. People who had no rights or power. People who were in despair. They weren't acceptable. They weren't respectable. They were the weak, the powerless, the unwanted, poor, suffering of society. They were the rejects of Judaism, if you will. They were considered unclean. They were not allowed in the community, let alone in the temple. They couldn't go to church, guys. They were not valued, and they were tossed away as worthless people. And here's the thing. When you had some form of abnormality back in those days, because you were considered unclean, you couldn't work. You couldn't be around the regular part of society. You couldn't make a living, so you were literally homeless. You were on the street begging for food, for money, for help. That was your lot in life. And then Jesus comes into the picture, and he flips their world upside down. He changes the way we ought to see people, regardless of their lot in life, their gender, their ethnicity, their background. And so Jesus goes through town and villages. It's healing the sick, the lame, the blind, and he feeds the hungry. He gives hope to the group of characters who had absolutely no hope. And he accepts the very people who normally wouldn't be accepted. And so the very question for us this morning is simply this. Why does Jesus go out of his way to help those in need? Why does Jesus go out of his way to feed the poor, to accept the rejected of society? Why does Jesus care so much about the outcast and the marginalized of society? And I think there's a variety of reasons, but today I'm only going to give you two, all right? Two. You're welcome. Two. Here's the thing. First is because of this. Simply, all people matter to Jesus. We've been saying it in the series again and again and again that every single person is created in the image of God. All people matter to Jesus. You see, it's easy to look at the religious leaders of the day, the ones people looked up to. They had they had knowledge, they had prestige, they had reputation. It's easy to accept people who are important people. It's easy to love people who offer something back to us, right? It's not that some people matter. To Jesus, it's that all people matter. There's no discrimination. There's no partiality. There's no favoritism. There's no looking down on people, condescending. There's no discarding of people because every person matters. Everybody has a soul, and God is concerned about souls. So turn to your neighbor and say, you matter. Turn to your other neighbor and say, you matter. You see, Jesus is brilliant. See, Jesus knows the human tendencies, and that's part of the reason why I think Jesus came into this world, into poverty. Look, God in all of his riches, he becomes a man. He becomes a human like one of us. He was born in a stable. He's son of a carpenter. And even as he grows up, Jesus spent a lot of his adult time as a person experiencing homelessness. If you don't believe me, look at what Matthew chapter 8, verse 20 says. It says this, and Jesus said, foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. In his adult life, he's going around sleeping at Peter's house. And he's doing all these. He knows what it's like to live without having much. He experienced it so we could relate with him. And this is the part of the reason why Jesus further writes in Matthew chapter 25. If you fast forward a little bit in verse 35 and 40, listen to what he says. I want you to listen very carefully. Then the king will say to those on the right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. In other words, when all is said and done and you stand before God one day, basically, here's your reward. For doing what? Verse 35, for I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison and you came to me. Then the righteous will answer him saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you? Or thirsty? When did we give you a drink? And when did we see you as a stranger? When did we welcome you? When you were naked and we clothed you? What? When did we see you sick or in prison and visit you? And the king will answer them, truly I say to you, as you did to one of the least of these, my brothers, you did it for me. Without knowing, whenever you help the poor, the vulnerable, the sick, the weak, the powerless, you are doing it for me. But here's what Jesus says going further, verse 41. Then he will say to those on his left, depart from me, you cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry and you gave me no food. I was thirsty and you gave me no drink. I was a stranger and you did not welcome me. Naked and did not clothe me. Sick and in prison and you did not visit me. Then they will also answer saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or stranger or naked or sick or in prison and did not minister to you? Then he will answer them saying, truly I say to you, as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me. I want you to see how serious this is. I want you to see that how we treat the least of us is one of the truest measures of whether we truly understand the heart of Jesus and the gospel message. That I want you to see that in Jesus' mind, there was no differentiating between one person to another person. And so for just a brief moment, I'd like us to consider the mindset of the poor versus the mindset of the middle and upper class. You see, the middle upper class mindset is, look, we have opportunities, we have resources, we have abilities. If there's a problem, do something about it. Try harder, do more. But the mindset of the poor, the mindset of those who do not have resources or opportunity is not, I need to try harder. They don't feel empowered. They feel helpless. Think about it. Telling a leper, a paralytic, a homeless person, well, look, you need to have a can-do attitude. Come on. Would be absurd, if not cruel. In college, I had the opportunity to go to Oaxaca, Mexico, on a mission trip. This was back in those days, right? We went to this area. Why are you guys laughing? We went to this area where there was minimal electricity. There was no running water. We had to dig holes, plop down, do our business, and then cover it up again, okay? And so one day we were out visiting different villages. We were going town to town. And then we came along this one village in particular. Many of the people were living in shacks. Many of them are just kind of sleeping outside. They didn't have a home of their own. Oaxaca, Mexico is right by the equator, so it's really warm, but people could kind of sleep outside. And so basically, I run into this one man. And I remember this one man asked me, we have nothing. Most of the village has no job, no income. And then he asked this question, what can your God do for us? Now, there was this helplessness, this hopelessness. There were no opportunities or resources. There was no one to turn to. The mindset of the poor is not, I'll try harder. The mindset of the poor is, I need a rescuer. Middle, upper class people don't beg. They do something. The poor, they know how to beg. They're weak and desperate. They know they couldn't solve their own problems. And Jesus is for those who know that they cannot save themselves. You see, the healthy, religious, strong didn't seek Jesus. It was the rejected, the dying, the unclean, the poor. Those are the ones who gravitated towards Jesus. You know, in one passage, Jesus says, not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. And I have come to call not the righteous, but sinners. You see, Jesus was revolutionary because he was saying, God isn't just for the elite. He's not just for the privileged, the wealthy, the powerful. God is for the weak, the sick, the poor, the homeless. And Jesus offered hope to the hopeless. Now here, I want you to listen to me very carefully here. And for those of us who want to know Jesus, the ironic lesson we learn is that we need to learn how to be poor and weak and helpless. That we do not come to God as a spiritual middle class. Do you hear me? We come to God as weak and broken. We need to learn how to abandon our middle class, upper middle class mindset and think and start seeing things like a beggar. And when we see ourselves in that light, spiritually speaking, then maybe we have a chance to reach the homeless community. See, I came across this video of a homeless woman at a metro station. I'm sure many of you guys have seen it this past week. It was all over the news, all over social media, okay? The officer recorded this woman who was singing at a metro station, and he recorded it because she was singing so beautifully. How many of you have seen that video this past week? I mean, okay, good. But you know what I love most about that? It's the caption. Let me read the caption for you. 4 million people call LA home. 4 million stories. 4 million voices. Sometimes you just have to stop and listen to one to hear something beautiful. Everybody has a story. Her name is Emily. She's actually a trained violinist and pianist. She taught lessons before she started suffering from serious health challenges. She worked several jobs to make ends meet. She played violin on the street as a street performer before her instrument was stolen in downtown LA. After sustaining injuries, she couldn't play anymore. That's when she became homeless, when she couldn't pay her bills and rent. Her story is so similar to so many people who are now without a home. It wasn't a choice. She matters to Jesus. She's seen. And I want you to see that every person has a story. So when it comes to homeless people, maybe we need to start seeing homelessness not just as a problem to be solved, although that's important, but as a people to be loved. Let me say that again. Maybe we need to start seeing homelessness not just as a problem to be solved, but as a people to be loved. Mother Teresa once wrote this, quote, "We think sometimes that poverty is only being hungry, naked, and homeless. The poverty of being unwanted, unloved, and uncared for is the greatest poverty. We must start in our own homes to remedy this," end quote. And I would add this: we must start this in our own church. Amen? We got to start it here. And maybe we need to start there because all people matter to Jesus. People matter because every soul is precious before God, and he wants us to embrace the poor. So why does Jesus go out of his way to help those in need? Why does Jesus go out of his way to feed the poor, to accept the rejected of society? First, because all people matter to Jesus. Here's the second reason, and it's really practical. Secondly, it's because he wants us to put our faith into action. He wants us to put, right? Like, he wants us to live it out. He set the example for us. He wants us to walk the talk. In James chapter 2, verses 15 through 17, it says this: if a brother or sister is poorly clothed and lacking in daily food, and one of you says to them, go in peace, be warmed and filled, without giving them things needed for the body, what good is that? Like, what good is that? So also faith by itself, if it does not have works, it's dead. So if I could put it simply, save people, serve people. See, saved people see the need. They get out of their comfort zones and they get involved. Like, have you ever been around people who talk a good game, but they don't walk the talk? You know what I'm talking about? Like, have you ever been around people like that? Like, this one time I saw this guy and this girl at a mall, okay? And this guy had one of those personas of being a thug, like a gangster. He was hard, he was tough, he looked the part, but he's really a suburban kid. And you're asking me, how do you know that? Well, I watched the interaction take place, and this is what unfolded. He had evidently did something wrong. He had hurt his girlfriend a lot, and she was really, really upset. And he kept on trying to play it off in front of all of his friends that were there. Yeah, I'll holler at you later, all that kind of stuff. And then she's looking at him, and all of a sudden, she said, Stuart! Yeah, and she's fuming mad, and she goes, you don't really talk like that. What? You're not talking to your boys, you're talking to me. And then the weirdest transformation took place. The guy went, sorry, Sarah, I didn't mean to say all that stuff. And I thought, what happened to Snoop Dogg? What's going on? All of a sudden, he's just Stuart. People who talk a good game, but they don't walk the talk. But you know what I love about Jesus? What I love about Jesus is how he walked the talk. That he didn't just say, go serve the poor and the sick. He actually did it himself. There's so many examples of this in Scripture, okay? From Jesus feeding the 5,000 to giving sight to the blind. But I just want to highlight just one just to illustrate this, okay? It comes from Luke chapter 5, verse 12. And verse 12 begins, while he was in one of the cities, there came a man full of leprosy. Now, leprosy was a highly contagious skin disease. Leprosy ate away the nerve endings in your fingers and in your nose. And if you were a leper, you were outlawed from mixing in with the public. You were looked down upon. You were different. So if a leper went out in public, people needed to yell, unclean, unclean, unclean. So people would distance themselves from you. They lived in isolation, waiting to die. They were invisible. Nobody cared. And most were homeless because of that. And so Luke chapter 5, verse 12 continues. And when he saw Jesus, he fell on his face and begged him, Lord, if you will, you can make me clean. Now, I want you to imagine this moment. The crowd is stunned. Mothers pull their children back. Get back, get back, get back. People are yelling all across, unclean, unclean. Look out, it's a leper. Mo. And what does Jesus do? Now, everybody's eyes are on the holiest man to ever walk on the face of the earth. And the question is, amongst the crowd, how will he treat this cursed man? How is he going to treat this outcast, this marginalized person? In verse 13, Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him, saying, I will be clean. And immediately the leprosy left him. Like, don't you love Jesus? Like, as God's beloved son, Jesus was a perfect representation of the Father's heart in heaven. And what is God's heart to the diseased, to the poor? those who are rejected and shunned. Jesus draws close, he steps into the mess, and he does something about it. He doesn't just show pity, it's not just charity, he touches the man. And instead of leprosy infecting Jesus, Jesus' love infects the leper. And he heals him, restores him as one who reflects the image of God. God's heart beats for the poor and sick and vulnerable. Like if you are a parent with a special needs child here, parents who have special needs children know this very thing. Look, you love all your family members and children equally, but there's a special compassion you feel for your special needs child, right? In the same way, God has a special compassion towards the poor and the vulnerable and the powerless. His heart beats for them. He brings worth and dignity, and he does something tangible to meet their very needs. Now, maybe some of you guys are thinking at this very moment, okay. I hear you, Pastor, I hear you. I get it. But where do I begin? Like, what can I do? Like, what am I supposed to do to show love? Show me. And that's why at this time, I want to invite actually one of our members to come up. I'm going to invite Marlon to come up. Okay? Now, our brother Marlon, he works specifically with people dealing with homelessness. Okay? Now, Marlon is the program director for SHARP, Southern California Health and Rehabilitation Program. And he works specifically under TIEH, Treatment of Individuals Experiencing Homelessness. And I think that he can help address some of the misconceptions, worries, and anxiety that we might be facing as we deal with this issue. So thank you, Marlon, for joining us. Let's give Marlon a hand. So maybe, Marlon, you could begin by just telling us what you do specifically and then how you got involved working with people experiencing homelessness.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. So I'm a licensed clinical social worker. So I've been a social worker and a therapist for the last 6 to 7 years. The 6 years I've been providing therapy to those with severe and persistent mental illness and those that are experiencing homelessness. And then in the last year, I became the program director for the same agency, and I now oversee kind of the vision and direction for the same population. So in terms of how I got involved, that's a good question. And I want to allude to the story that Pastor David had talked about in terms of the man with leprosy. And I relate to that story a lot just because, you know, for that guy, for the man with leprosy, he was considered unclean. And because he was considered unclean, society had already deemed him second class. He was basically isolated from everybody. He couldn't be in the community without kind of informing people that he was unclean. He was already labeled as someone dirty, disgusting. And so when I think about this man with leprosy, it comes to mind how he must have felt. He must have felt like, man, I feel alone in this world. He must have felt really just like vulnerable and lost and confused. He must have felt like an outcast, someone that didn't have a voice, someone that had no purpose, no value, no worth. In many ways, his identity was his disease. But I love how the story ends, because even though the world labeled him as unclean, Jesus saw him as a child of God. And because of that, he was no longer identified by his disease. He was no longer identified by his uncleanliness. Rather, he was identified by how Jesus saw him. So for me, I saw that same Christ-like behavior among amazing volunteers that really had a heart for those that were marginalized. In 2004, I was part of a ministry called Love South Park, in which we reached out to children and families in communities, low-income communities, as well as those experiencing homelessness. So yeah, that's the picture. I'm 21 years old, 2004.
You look the same, by the way.
Yes, thank you. Yes. In fact, some of the people know are here today. One of them is sitting in front, Esther. Anyways, so there's this ministry, And I remember the volunteers that came out to this ministry were just like the people here at this church. People that were mothers, fathers, children, students, interns, working professionals of all different careers, doctors, nurses, architects, people that just love God, you know? And the one thing I really noticed about all of them, the one thing that had a commonality between all of them is that they all recognized how broken they were. However, they were not defined by their brokenness. Rather, they were defined by how Jesus saw them. And because of the love they experienced from Jesus, they wanted to share that same message with the people in the community, those children and families that too felt broken, but to let them know that you don't have to be labeled as broken anymore, but you can be labeled as a child of God. So it was great. The ministry was amazing. And, you know, every Sunday afternoon, sometimes even on weekdays, I would witness these amazing volunteers go out into the park and bring church to these families. I would witness the volunteers bringing Bible studies, worship songs, food, games. I remember one of the songs that they sang. It was deep, oh, deep down, down. That's it. That's all I'm going to say. I remember the kids that came out to the park and to the ministry, how much they loved being there. I saw the joy on their faces. I saw how much they really bonded, how they laughed, how they sang, and they were just being kids. But I think the most important thing, one thing that really stood out about that ministry was the deep relationships that were being formed at that park. I saw these volunteers not only do games and activities and food, but I saw them listen to their stories. I saw them listen to their struggles. I saw them empathize. I saw them pray. I saw them see these kids as Jesus would see them, a child of God. And so that itself really moved me and made me want to make this a full-time career, continuing to listen to those stories, continuing to listen to those struggles, and journeying with people that were marginalized and reminding them how much God loves them.
Well, thank you for continuing doing the great work that you guys are doing, yeah. And I love how that group, like, you guys were there with them in the trenches, literally loving on them, and I love that. Maybe for our congregation here, like, are there any misconceptions about people who are experiencing homelessness that you would like to share with us as a congregation? Maybe even as encouragement or even as a correction or a rebuke. Like, are there any misconceptions? Because I think we all have certain misconceptions, but are there any misconceptions you would like to share with us and would like our people to know about?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I think one of the biggest misconceptions that society struggles with is that because they are homeless, it's their fault. They chose to be homeless. And so, you know, the blessing of having the opportunity to do therapy with those experiencing homelessness is you really get to see the real stories, the whole truth of why they became homeless. And I can tell you from hearing these stories, and then also from just research, that, you know, a lot of these individuals that became homeless, it's because, well, a lot of them couldn't afford, they lost their jobs, so they couldn't afford paying their bills. They couldn't afford paying their rent. So they were forced to go into the streets. They were forced to become homeless or go into shelters. I can say that I've known families, I've known men and women that had to run away because of domestic violence, and they had nowhere to go to except the streets. I can tell you that a lot of these individuals were undergoing a lot of physical health or mental issues, and they couldn't maintain basic functioning. You know, and as a result, they couldn't keep up with the rent and they became homeless. But I think the biggest thing that really captured my eyes was, I don't want to do this again, I did in the last crying. Children that were born into homelessness. I would see children born into homelessness and it was not their choice. I remember at the ministry that I volunteered at Love South Park, we would directly witness children that were homeless living in a van. And we would see them and we would journey with them. So those are some of the things I want you guys to know as the misconceptions that, you know, not all homeless people choose to be homeless. In fact, a majority of them are forced to be homeless because of their circumstances or whatever is going in their life.
Yeah, and I think that's important for us to kind of remember because, again, alluding to my earlier part of the message, I think sometimes we tend to generalize people all into one camp, and I think it's important. Thank you for sharing that with us. You know, when I think about people experiencing homelessness and this whole issue, I don't think for many of us our problem is necessarily that we don't know that we need to love people who are experiencing homelessness. We know we do it, but probably the question is like, how do we do it? Like, what are we supposed to do, right? And so maybe Marlon, you can help us. Like, what's one thing, one practical, tangible, concrete thing that we can do as a congregation, as a church, to put our faith into action?
Yeah, great question. So I honestly think one of the biggest things that you guys can do as a community or as an individual is to really kind of confront some of those reservations that you have in terms of meeting or working or spending time with those experiencing homelessness. I think we, myself included, we struggle with some of the anxieties, the worries, the fears of what it looks like to spend time or interact with those experiencing homelessness. And I think a lot what we can do is really find a friend at church or someone that you're close with. Maybe talk about it in your small groups. Talk about those reservations. Talk about those anxieties, worries, and fears, and really process that. I can tell you at Love South Park, we did a lot of that. After we had served in the community, we would come and have dinner, and we would talk about the stories about how we met this person, how that impacted us, and what that was doing to us. And we would learn and grow over time how we can feel God's heart towards the people. So that's one thing. I have other things. Okay. I think the next thing is really praying for those individuals that are experiencing homelessness. Just like in the video that you saw people that were going up to the pastor who was pretending to be homeless to really just intercede because they truly believed in the power of God. And God's power is not limited. He can do anything. And so we should definitely pray for those experiencing homelessness because He can do so many wonders and really show that true love. And then I think the last thing is, to be honest, we have this whole We Love LA series. I mean, there's opportunities to get involved. So I would say, go check it out. Talk to the people at the table. Ask questions. Don't just put it to the side, but really confront that kind of question you're having. And then maybe get involved. Go, do one of those signups. The cleanup, going to the shelter at the Union Rescue Mission. I've been to the Union Rescue Mission, and it's amazing what they do over there. So yeah.
Thanks, Marlon. Let's give Marlon a hand for appreciate that. And I think here's the reality. The reality is this. We don't have all the answers when it comes to homelessness. In many ways, we don't know what to do. But that doesn't mean that we just sit there. We can still put our faith into action one step at a time. And maybe, as Marlon just mentioned, maybe the first step is just to ask questions, is to bring awareness, to process this. Or maybe it's to get involved with the service project that we're going to have this coming Saturday at the Union Rescue Mission. One day, to get out of our comfort of our homes, and we just love on the people who are experiencing homelessness this Saturday. I want to let you know that we have about 40 slots minimum that are still available right now. 40 slots. And we're going to be taking over the Union Rescue Mission. From cooking to cleaning to counseling to help. We're just going to do the whole thing. And we would love it if you were part of that. Maybe this is the first step for you. There's going to be 100 of us. Maybe it'll be a safe place for you, that you're not alone in doing it, but we're going to be there together as a community. Because I truly believe that one act leads to this stirring, which leads to compassion, which eventually leads to a bigger heart. It all begins with one act of faith. And I believe God can just multiply that 10 times fold, 100 times fold. And that's my prayer for our church. That was me in prayer. Lord, you know that whenever there's a message about people experiencing homelessness, it's not an easy topic. Lord, you know our hearts. You know what's deep down in our hearts. You know what fills it, whether it's guilt or fear. And so I just pray right now, God, that some way, in some measure, that your word, your example will take root in our hearts. That your example that you set before us will be our heart. And that somehow that we would embrace those who are in need. And that we would love on them, being the hands and feet of Jesus Christ. And so I pray, God, for every single person here, may we become a church that loves all people. Help us to do that because we cannot do that by our own strength. So we just ask for an extra measure of your grace and your mercy and supernatural love, God. And may it begin somehow just one step forward, one act of faith. And we believe you can multiply that in tremendous ways. So help us, oh God. And at this moment, give us eyes to see. We pray that in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you so much for checking out this video. If you enjoyed it, would you give us a like? Also, would you hit the subscribe and the notification buttons? And then you'll be notified about all future content that we post here. Also, if you want to get involved with our community, please fill out a Connect card and one of our pastors will be sure to follow up with you. Thank you so much for checking out this channel. God bless you.